The sun dipped behind the rugged mountains of Colorado Territory. 1876, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Wyatt Nolan rode into town, his stallions' hooves kicking up clouds of amber dust that swirled around them like whispered secrets. His weathered face, though only 28 years old, told stories of harsh winters, unforgiving summers, and a life spent under the endless sky. A life that had hardened his exterior, but never quite reached the core of who he was, a man who still believed in something beyond the violence and lawlessness that defined the frontier. Wyatt dismounted outside the town's only saloon, the Silver Dollar, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. His lean frame carried visible weariness, but his eyes remained alert as he pushed through the batwing doors. The familiar sense of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco smoke enveloped him as conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with increased fervor. He'd grown accustomed to this reaction. Being a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter tended to make folks uneasy. "Well, if it ain't Wyatt Nolan," drawled Samuel Jenkins, the saloon owner, wiping down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. "Thought you were headed to Denver." "Changed my plans," Wyatt replied, his voice low as he took a seat at the bar. "Whiskey. The good kind, not that rotgut you serve the miners." Jenkins chuckled, reaching beneath the counter for a bottle he reserved for special customers. "Passing through or staying a while?" Wyatt didn't answer immediately, his thoughts drifting to the worn wanted poster folded in his pocket. Thomas, two-gun Riley, last seen in these parts with a $500 bounty on his head. "Depends on how things unfold." The saloon doors swung open again, and the room fell into a silence deeper than before. Wyatt turned slightly on his stool, just enough to observe the newcomer from the corner of his eye. It wasn't Riley, but rather a young woman who stood with quiet dignity despite the open stares directed her way. She couldn't have been more than 22, with auburn hair pulled back beneath a modest bonnet and a blue dress that had clearly been mended multiple times. What struck Wyatt most, however, were her eyes, determined, intelligent, and carrying a hint of defiance that seemed at odds with her otherwise proper appearance. "Miss Kendrick," Jenkins acknowledged with a nod that contained neither warmth nor hostility. "Your usual." "Yes, please, Mr. Jenkins," she replied, her voice carrying a refined quality that marked her as educated. "And any messages?" As Jenkins disappeared into a back room, whispers erupted around the saloon. "Don't know why she bothers coming into town. Schoolteacher thinking she's too good for Silver Creek. After what her pa did." Wyatt observed how the woman, Miss Kendrick, kept her posture straight, her expression neutral, though he noticed the slight tightening of her gloved hands on her reticule. Jenkins returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mail came yesterday. Nothing much, just that journal you subscribe to. Thank you." She placed a few coins on the counter. "And regarding my request about using the town hall next month for town council," said "No, Miss Kendrick," Jenkins interrupted, not unkindly. "Said they need it for storage." A flicker of disappointment crossed her face before being quickly masked. "I see. Thank you anyway." As she turned to leave, a burly miner deliberately stepped into her path. "Excuse me," she said politely, attempting to sidestep him. "Ain't nothing to excuse," the miner replied, alcohol heavy on his breath. "Except maybe your presence in our respectable establishment." "I have as much right to be here as anyone," she answered, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her shoulders. "A Kendrick talking about rights." Another miner joined in, laughing harshly. "Your pa stole half this town's money before vanishing. Only reason you're not run out is 'cause Sheriff Thomas took pity on you." Wyatt watched as Miss Kendrick's composure wavered slightly. My father's actions are not mine. Now please let me pass. Playing the proper schoolmarm don't change your blood, the first miner persisted. Thinking you can teach our children when everyone knows Kendricks can't be trusted. Something in Wyatt shifted as he observed the scene, the lone woman facing down growing hostility with nothing but dignity as her shield. Before he could reconsider, he found himself standing, whiskey forgotten on the bar. "The lady asked you to let her pass," he said quietly, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. The miners turned, sizing up the stranger. Recognition dawned in the first man's eyes. "This ain't your business, Nolan." "It is now." Wyatt stepped forward. "Move aside." The second miner glanced between Wyatt's steady gaze and the visible notches on his gun belt before nudging his companion. "Come on, Frank. Not worth it." Frank hesitated, pride warring with self-preservation. "You defending a Kendrick. She's not worth your name, Nolan, not with your reputation." Wyatt's expression remained unchanged. "She's a lady being harassed by drunks. That's all that matters right now." With reluctant muttering, the miners moved aside. Wyatt nodded to Miss Kendrick, who regarded him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Thank you, Mr. Nolan," she said formally. "Though I could have managed." "No doubt," Wyatt replied with the faintest smile. "But my mother taught me better than to sit idle while a lady's being bothered." Something unreadable passed through her eyes. "Then she taught you well. Good day." As she departed, Frank called after her, "Better watch yourself, Prudence Kendrick. Teaching our children don't make you one of us." When the saloon doors closed behind her, several patrons approached Wyatt's table. "You're new here, Nolan," said an older man with a silver badge pinned to his vest. "Sheriff Thomas," Wyatt presumed. "So you don't know about the Kendricks?" Her father was the bank manager who ran off with folks' savings 2 years back, nearly ruined this town. Wyatt took a measured sip of his whiskey. "And that's her doing." "No," the sheriff admitted. "Girl stayed behind, took over the schoolhouse when our teacher left. Lives alone in that little cabin by the creek. Keeps to herself mostly. Except when she's pushing her ideas about education for all," Jenkins added from behind the bar. "Wants to teach the miners to read, start classes for the women and such, causing ripples." "Sounds dangerous," Wyatt remarked dryly. Frank, emboldened by whiskey and an audience, leaned in. "She thinks she's better than us with her books and fancy words. What are you doing defending her anyway? She's not worth your name, Nolan." Wyatt considered the man for a long moment before responding. "My name's my own to risk as I see fit," he said evenly. "And from where I stand, treating a lady with basic respect costs nothing." He finished his whiskey and stood, laying coins on the bar. "Sheriff, I hear 2-Gun Riley might be in these parts. Any truth to that?" Thomas raised his eyebrows. "Might be. Rumors of a gang causing trouble in the Northern Valley. You hunting him?" Wyatt nodded. "Among others. I'll be around for a few days at least." As he headed toward the door, Frank called after him. "Better watch yourself with Prudence Kendrick, bounty hunter. That woman's nothing but trouble wearing a pretty face." Wyatt didn't respond as he stepped back into the fading daylight, but his thoughts lingered on Prudence Kendrick and the quiet strength she displayed. In his years of tracking outlaws across the frontier, he developed a keen sense for reading people, and there was something about the schoolteacher that intrigued him far more than he cared to admit. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, with a hint of autumn in the mountain air. Wyatt spent the early hours asking discreet questions about Riley's possible whereabouts, while gathering information about Silver Creek and its inhabitants. By mid-afternoon, he found himself riding slowly past the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, just as children spilled out into the yard, their voices carrying on the breeze. Prudence Kendrick stood at the door, bidding each child goodbye by name. She wore a simple brown dress today, her hair secured in a practical bun, yet there was something undeniably graceful in her bearing. When she noticed Wyatt, surprise briefly crossed her features before she composed herself and walked to the fence separating the schoolyard from the road. "Mr. Nolan," she acknowledged, "are you lost or merely curious about our educational facilities?" "Neither, Miss Kendrick," he replied, tipping his hat. "Just getting acquainted with the town." He nodded toward the schoolhouse. "Seems you run a tight ship." A hint of pride touched her expression. 27 students, ages 6 to 15. Not bad for a mining settlement. "Impressive," Wyatt agreed genuinely. "Must be challenging, teaching so many different ages." "It can be," she conceded, studying him with curious eyes. "Though I doubt you came this way to discuss educational methods, Mr. Nolan." Wyatt smiled slightly. "Perhaps I wanted to ensure you hadn't encountered any more trouble after yesterday. Your concern is appreciated but unnecessary. I'm quite accustomed to Silver Creek's particular form of hospitality." A small girl with braided blonde hair approached, tugging at Prudence's skirt. "Miss Kendrick, can I show Mr. Nolan my reading?" Prudence's expression softened. "Mr. Nolan is busy, Lily, and it's may I not can I." "It's all right," Wyatt said, surprising himself. "I have a few minutes." With Prudence's hesitant permission, he dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. Lily proudly displayed her primer, reading a short passage about a farm with only minor stumbling. Wyatt listened attentively, genuinely impressed by the child's progress. "That's mighty fine reading, Miss Lily," he said when she finished. "You must have an excellent teacher." Lily beamed. "Miss Kendrick is the best. She knows everything and doesn't even use the switch like old Mr. Finch did." "Lily," Prudence admonished gently, though her cheeks colored slightly, "your mother will be waiting. Run along now." After Lily departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Wyatt found himself uncharacteristically searching for words. "You seem to have made quite an impression on your students." "Children are remarkably resilient to town gossip," Prudence replied. "They care more about fairness than family history." She hesitated. "I should thank you properly for your intervention yesterday. It was unexpected." "No thanks needed. I've never had much patience for bullies, regardless of their reasons." Prudence studied him with those intelligent eyes. "You're hunting someone in Silver Creek." It wasn't a question. News travels fast. "In a town this size, breathing differently is cause for gossip," she said with a hint of wryness. "They say you were a Texas Ranger once." "Once," he acknowledged. "Now I track men with bounties. It's simpler." "Is it?" she asked with surprising perception. "Hunting men for money seems anything but simple, Mr. Nolan." Before he could respond, Sheriff Thomas approached on horseback. "Nolan," he called. "Got word about suspicious activity up at the old Carson mine. Might be worth looking into if you're hunting Riley." Wyatt nodded, turning back to Prudence. "Duty calls, Miss Kendrick." "Be careful, Mr. Nolan," she said. "The old mines are dangerous, even without outlaws hiding in them." As Wyatt prepared to mount his horse, a thought struck him. "I heard you were trying to organize reading lessons for the miners." Surprise flickered across her face. "Yes, though the town council seems determined to block my efforts at every turn." "Why is it so important to you?" Prudence's expression grew serious. "Because education isn't a luxury, Mr. Nolan. It's a necessity. These men work in dangerous conditions for meager pay, then get cheated at cards and shortchanged at stores because they can't read contracts or count properly." Her passion was evident in every word. "Knowledge is power, and too many people in this town have none." Wyatt found himself nodding. "A worthy cause." "Not according to most," she replied with a resigned smile. but I've never been one to abandon an idea simply because it's unpopular." "That much is evident," he said, mounting his horse. "Good day, Miss Kendrick." As he rode away with the sheriff, Wyatt reflected that Prudence Kendrick was indeed causing ripples in Silver Creek, but perhaps they were exactly the kind this rough-edged town needed. The old Carson mine proved to be a dead end, with only signs of transient prospectors rather than Riley's gang. For 3 days, Wyatt continued his investigation, gathering scraps of information while increasingly finding himself crossing paths with Prudence Kendrick. He observed her resilience in the face of continued cold shoulders from many townspeople, how she held her head high while shopping at the general store despite the whispers, how she patiently helped elderly Mrs. Whitaker, who had publicly snubbed her just minutes before. On the 4th day, Wyatt was returning from scouting the northern valley when he noticed smoke rising from the direction of the schoolhouse. Urging his horse forward, he arrived to find a small crowd gathered as flames began to lick at the wooden structure's roof. Prudence stood watching in horror, her face ashen. Wyatt dismounted in a fluid motion, rushing toward her. "What happened?" "I don't know," she managed, her voice tight with emotion. "I had locked up for the day and was walking home when I saw the smoke." The children's books, their lessons, everything without another word. Wyatt sprinted toward the building, ignoring shouts from the gathering crowd. The fire was still concentrated at the rear of the schoolhouse, and he managed to force open the front door. Smoke immediately assaulted his lungs as he moved quickly through the classroom, gathering as many books and student records as he could carry. He made 3 trips before the sheriff, and several minors physically prevented him from returning. "It's too dangerous now, Nolan," Thomas insisted as the roof began to collapse. "The whole thing's coming down." Wyatt stood beside Prudence as they watched the schoolhouse burn, her face illuminated by the cruel orange glow. To her credit, she didn't cry, though the devastation in her eyes was evident. Sheriff Thomas organized a bucket brigade, but it was clear they were only preventing the fire from spreading, not saving the building. "It wasn't an accident," she said quietly, so only Wyatt could hear. "Someone wanted this to happen." Wyatt had suspected the same, noting how quickly the fire had spread. "You have enemies that dedicated." "Education has enemies that dedicated, Mr. Nolan," she replied, staring at the flames, "particularly when it threatens to change the established order." Later, as the embers cooled and the crowd dispersed, Wyatt helped Prudence salvage what little remained: a few charred books, a partially melted school bell, and the slate board that had somehow survived the collapse. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Thank you seems insufficient for risking your life for books and papers." "They're more than that," Wyatt replied, understanding intuitively. "They're your purpose." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing something new. "Most men would say I'm foolish to be so dedicated to teaching in a place that clearly doesn't want me." "I'm not most men," he said simply. "And Silver Creek would be poorer without you, whether they recognize it or not." Prudence glanced back at the smoldering ruins. "I should feel defeated, but all I feel is angry and determined." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I'll teach in the open air if necessary." "You won't have to," came Sheriff Thomas's voice as he approached, looking uncomfortable. "Town councils agreed you can use the back room of the church temporarily. Mayor's orders." Surprise registered on Prudence's face. "That's unexpected." "Well," Thomas shifted awkwardly, "seems even folks who don't care for the Kendrick name draw the line at burning down schools with children's belongings inside." He cleared his throat. "I'll be investigating this, Miss Kendrick. Fire like this doesn't just happen." After the sheriff departed, Wyatt offered to walk Prudence home. They moved through the gathering dusk in companionable silence until they reached her small cabin near the creek. It was modest but well-maintained, with late-blooming wildflowers growing along the path. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Nolan?" she asked suddenly. "After today's events, I find I'm not ready for solitude quite yet." Wyatt hesitated only briefly. "I'd be obliged, Miss Kendrick." Inside, the cabin was neat and sparsely furnished, but undeniably warm. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that would have been considered extravagant in a frontier town. While Prudence prepared coffee, Wyatt examined the titles: philosophy, science, mathematics, literature, a collection reflecting a hungry, curious mind. "My father's," she said, noticing his interest, "the one thing he didn't take when he fled." Wyatt accepted the offered cup. "You don't have to explain." "Don't I?" she asked with a sad smile. "Everyone else seems to think my father's sins are written in my blood. That I'm just waiting for the right moment to reveal my true Kendrick nature." "What happened?" Wyatt asked quietly. "With your father." Prudence was silent for a long moment. "He was the bank manager. Respected, trusted. I was teaching back east when he wrote asking me to join him in this promising new mining town." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. "I arrived to find him gone, along with nearly $40,000 of the townspeople's money. No note, no explanation, just a house full of belongings and a town full of people who suddenly hated our name. Yet you stayed." "Where would I go?" she asked simply. "Besides, running would have confirmed what everyone believed, that Kendricks can't be trusted." She met his gaze directly. "I refuse to let my father's actions define me." Wyatt nodded, understanding completely. "That takes courage." "Some would call it stubbornness," she replied with a hint of humor. "Including my former fiancé, who promptly broke our engagement upon learning of my father's disgrace." "Then he was a fool," Wyatt said without thinking. The words hung between them, creating a moment of unexpected intimacy. Prudence looked away first. "You never mentioned why you left the Rangers, Mr. Nolan." "Wyatt," he corrected gently. "Seems we're past formalities after today." She nodded. "Prudence, then." Wyatt set down his cup, considering how much to share. "I joined the Rangers young, believing in justice and order. 5 years in, I was part of a company sent to handle a dispute between cattle barons and smaller ranchers." His jaw tightened at the memory. "Orders came down to side with the barons, regardless of right or wrong. When I refused, things got complicated." "You chose conscience over orders," Prudence observed. "And learned that justice is rarely as clear as we'd like it to be," he concluded. "Bounty hunting is more honest in its way. The law decides who's guilty, I just bring them in." "And you never question those decisions?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Wyatt's lips curved slightly. "I didn't say that." Their conversation continued late into the evening, ranging from books they'd read to places they'd seen, revealing shared values beneath their different experiences. When Wyatt finally rose to leave, he found himself reluctant to end their conversation. At the door, Prudence said, "I've enjoyed this evening, Wyatt. It's been some time since I've had a conversation not colored by my family name." "The pleasure was mine," he replied genuinely. "Though I suspect rebuilding the school will occupy most of your time now." "Yes," she sighed. "Starting over is becoming something of a specialty for me." Impulsively, Wyatt said, "I could help," before continuing my search for Riley. Surprise flickered across her face. "You have your own work, your own purpose." "Riley isn't going anywhere," he said. "And sometimes purposes can temporarily align." As he walked back to the boarding house where he was staying, Wyatt realized 2 unsettling facts. He was becoming dangerously interested in Prudence Kendrick, and helping her would inevitably make him enemies in Silver Creek, the very place where he needed cooperation to find Riley. Yet somehow, neither concern bothered him as much as it should have. The following week transformed Silver Creek's perception of both Wyatt Nolan and Prudence Kendrick. While continuing his discreet inquiries about Riley, Wyatt devoted mornings to helping Prudence salvage what remained of the school's materials and prepare the church's back room for classes. His involvement drew attention, some positive, some decidedly not. Becoming mighty domestic for a bounty hunter, Frank commented one evening at the saloon, loud enough for all to hear. Helping the Kendrick woman rebuild what was probably just an accident. Wyatt continued his card game without looking up. Funny definition of accident fire starting in 3 separate places with no one inside. The saloon quieted as Sheriff Thomas, sitting nearby, looked up sharply. You found evidence of that, behind the stove near the back door and in the supply closet, Wyatt confirmed. Coal oil at each spot. Noticed it while salvaging books. Thomas's expression hardened. That's information you should have shared immediately, Nolan. Figured you'd already noted it during your investigation, Wyatt replied evenly, meeting the sheriff's gaze. Unless you didn't actually investigate. A tense silence fell as the implication hung in the air. Eventually, Thomas stood. I'll look into it. Though why anyone would target a schoolhouse is beyond me. Maybe because Miss Kendrick was planning to use it for evening classes, offered Jenkins unexpectedly. When everyone looked at him, he shrugged. Just saying, some folks were mighty vocal about not wanting minors learning to read. Bad for business when workers can understand contracts and such. As murmurs spread through the saloon, Wyatt returned to his cards, but his mind was working through this new information. Someone had deliberately destroyed the schoolhouse, and Prudence's educational ambitions seemed the likely motive. The question was whether it connected to Riley's gang, or was merely local politics taken to criminal extremes. His concerns deepened the next day when he arrived at the church to find Prudence reading a crudely written note, her face pale. "What is it?" he asked, immediately alert. She handed him the paper wordlessly. The message was simple. Stop teaching or next time IT won't be just the building. Anger coursed through Wyatt as he carefully folded the note. Have you shown this to Sheriff Thomas? Not yet, she replied. I found it nailed to the door just before you arrived. We'll go together, he decided. This crosses from vandalism to direct threats. As they walked toward the sheriff's office, Prudence said quietly, I've received similar messages before. Nothing this explicit, but the sentiment was clear. Wyatt stopped in his tracks. And you didn't report them. What would be the point? She asked with weary pragmatism. Half the town wishes I would leave. Sheriff Thomas does what he can, but his influence only extends so far. She met his gaze directly. This is my battle, Wyatt. I'm grateful for your help, but you have your own purpose here. Some battles are too important to fight alone, he replied. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a recognition. Why are you really helping me, Wyatt? It can't simply be because of a school fire. He considered his answer carefully. Maybe because I recognize someone fighting for what's right, regardless of the odds. That's rare enough to be worth defending. Before Prudence could respond, gunshots echoed from the direction of the bank, followed by shouting. Instinctively, Wyatt positioned himself between Prudence and the commotion. Get to the sheriff's office and stay there, he instructed, drawing his revolver. Wyatt, please, he said more firmly. I need to know you're safe. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded and moved quickly toward the sheriff's building while Wyatt advanced cautiously toward the source of the gunfire. Ahead, he saw 4 mounted men galloping from the bank, saddlebags bulging, guns firing into the air to clear their path. One rider's features were clearly visible beneath his hat: Thomas Riley. The man Wyatt had been hunting for weeks. Acting on instinct and training, Wyatt took cover behind a water trough and fired twice. His first shot missed, but the second caught one of the riders in the shoulder, nearly unseating him. The wounded man recovered and the gang thundered past, narrowly missing townspeople who scrambled for safety. Wyatt sprinted to where his horse was hitched outside the general store, quickly mounting and spurring the animal into pursuit. As he galloped after the fleeing robbers, he heard hoofbeats behind him and glanced back to see Sheriff Thomas and two deputies following. The chase led into the foothills north of town, through increasingly rough terrain where the gang's knowledge of the landscape gave them advantage. After nearly an hour of pursuit, the trail led to a fork in a narrow canyon. Sheriff Thomas pulled alongside Wyatt. "They're heading for the old mining camp at Rattlesnake Ridge," he shouted over the pounding hooves. "Perfect place for an ambush." Wyatt nodded grimly. "They'll be expecting us to follow directly. Is there another approach?" "There's an old prospector's trail that circles around, but it adds miles to the journey." "Split up," Wyatt decided. "You and one deputy continue pursuit to keep them focused forward. I'll take the back trail with the other deputy." Thomas hesitated only briefly before agreeing, recognizing the tactical advantage. "Johnson, go with Nolan. McCready with me, and Nolan," he added seriously. "Riley's mine to arrest. Clear." "As long as he surrenders peacefully," Wyatt replied, knowing full well that Riley's reputation suggested otherwise. The plan set, they separated at the fork. Wyatt and Deputy Johnson followed the winding trail that climbed steeply before traversing a ridge overlooking the abandoned mining camp. The extra distance took nearly 2 hours, but when they finally approached from above, they had a clear view of the scene below. Riley's gang had established themselves in the remains of the mining office, a sturdy stone structure with clear sightlines of the main trail. Sheriff Thomas and Deputy McCready were pinned down behind rocks some 100 yards from the building, occasional gunfire keeping them from advancing. "4 of them, 2 of us, and the sheriff and McCready below," Johnson whispered as they secured their horses. "Not great odds." "We have surprise," Wyatt countered, studying the layout, "and high ground." They carefully positioned themselves on the rocky slope overlooking the mining office, using boulders for cover. Wyatt took aim at a barred window where one of the gang members was stationed. His shot shattered the glass and struck the man, whose cry of pain alerted the others to the new threat. Gunfire erupted toward their position as Riley and his remaining men realized they were caught in a crossfire. Taking advantage of the distraction, Sheriff Thomas and McCready advanced closer to the building. For several tense minutes, bullets flew from multiple directions until a white shirt appeared in the doorway of the office, waving in surrender. "We're coming out," called a voice. "Don't shoot." 3 men emerged slowly, hands raised, but Wyatt immediately noted Riley wasn't among them. As Thomas and McCready moved to secure the surrendering outlaws, Wyatt signaled Johnson to watch the building's rear exit. His instincts proved correct when moments later, a figure darted from a back window, making for the horses tethered nearby. Wyatt took careful aim and fired, the shot striking the ground near Riley's feet. "Next one won't miss, Riley." The outlaw froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Well now, if it ain't the famous Wyatt Nolan," he drawled. "Heard you've been looking for me. Thomas Riley, you're under arrest for robbery, murder, and evading justice," Wyatt called, moving carefully down the slope, his gun trained on the outlaw. Riley's smile never reached his cold eyes. "Big words for a man who's all alone up there." The warning came too late as Wyatt sensed movement behind him. Something hard struck the back of his head, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope as consciousness faded to black. When Wyatt awoke, pain radiated from his head and left side. He was lying on a cot in an unfamiliar room, the scent of medicinal herbs hanging in the air, attempting to sit up sent daggers of agony through his ribs. "I wouldn't move just yet," came Prudence's voice. She appeared at his bedside, concern evident in her eyes. "You've got 3 cracked ribs and a concussion." Riley, Wyatt managed, his mouth dry as dust. "Captured along with his entire gang," she assured him, offering a cup of water. "Sheriff Thomas got them all thanks to your strategy, though you nearly died in the process." As his vision cleared, Wyatt realized he was in Prudence's cabin. "How long?" "2 days," she replied, helping him take small sips. "They brought you here since Doc Sanders was overwhelmed with other injuries from the bank robbery. I've had some medical training." Memories began returning: the chase, the ambush, the hidden gang member he'd failed to spot. "Anyone else hurt?" "Deputy Johnson took a bullet in the arm but will recover. One townsperson was killed during the robbery. Mr. Peterson from the assay office." Her expression softened. "You're being hailed as quite the hero, Wyatt. The reward for Riley's capture is substantial." Wyatt closed his eyes briefly, not feeling particularly heroic at the moment. "Understandable given your condition," she said with a hint of humor. "Though your reputation in Silver Creek has certainly improved. Even Frank Whitaker was singing your praises at the Saloon yesterday." Over the next few days, Wyatt recovered slowly under Prudence's care. Their conversations deepened as the forced proximity broke down remaining barriers between them. He learned of her childhood in Boston, her passion for teaching that had led her to pursue education at a time when women's opportunities were limited. She, in turn, discovered his quiet love of poetry, his complicated relationship with his ranger past, and his uncertainty about his future as a bounty hunter. Sheriff Thomas visited regularly, updating Wyatt on Riley's processing and the evidence linking his gang to numerous crimes across the territory. During one such visit, Thomas revealed an unexpected connection. "Found something interesting among Riley's possessions," he said, placing a folded paper on the table. "A list of businesses they'd targeted or planned to hit. The schoolhouse was on it, marked as distraction." Prudence looked up sharply from where she was brewing coffee. "What do you mean, distraction?" "They burned it deliberately to draw attention while they scouted the bank," Thomas explained. "Riley's men were behind the threatening notes too, wanted to create tension in town, keep everyone focused on local disagreements while they prepared for the robbery." Wyatt and Prudence exchanged glances, processing this information. What had seemed like local hostility toward education was actually part of an outlaw gang strategy. "Not that there weren't plenty of folks opposed to your teaching plans," Thomas added candidly to Prudence. "But the fire and threats, that wasn't them." After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence filled the cabin as they confronted the implications. Finally, Prudence spoke. "It changes things knowing it wasn't the townspeople who went that far, does it?" Wyatt asked. "They may not have set the fire, but they created the environment where it wouldn't raise suspicion." "True," she acknowledged, "but it also means there's hope for change, if it was just a criminal act rather than genuine hatred." "It gives you a new beginning," Wyatt finished for her. "Another chance to build what you envision." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them: recognition that more than one new beginning might be possible in Silver Creek. As Wyatt's recovery progressed, so too did plans for rebuilding the schoolhouse. The town council, perhaps influenced by the revelation of Riley's involvement and Wyatt's heroism, voted to allocate funds for construction. Several miners volunteered labor, and even Frank Whitaker offered discounted lumber from his small sawmill operation. By the time Wyatt was well enough to ride, the foundation for the new school was already laid. Standing at the construction site with Prudence, watching townspeople work together in a way that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier, he felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. "Will you stay for the completion?" Prudence asked, her question carrying deeper meaning than the simple words suggested. "I need to take Riley to Denver," Wyatt replied, watching disappointment flicker across her face before adding, "But I'll return. I've never seen a schoolhouse raising before." Hope replaced disappointment in her expression. The bounty hunter retiring to watch construction, the bounty hunter considering other possibilities, he corrected gently. "This life, it takes more than it gives eventually." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by approaching hoofbeats. A group of riders stopped nearby wealthy ranchers from the surrounding area, led by Edwin Prescott, the most influential man in the county. "Miss Kendrick," Prescott called, dismounting with the confidence of one accustomed to deference. "I understand congratulations are in order for your new schoolhouse." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," Prudence replied cautiously, "though the building is just beginning." "Yes, well, that's partly why I've come," he continued, glancing dismissively at Wyatt before focusing on Prudence. "The County Education Board, of which I am chairman, has received an interesting offer. The territorial governor is establishing a new academy in Denver and seeking experienced educators. Given your situation here, I thought you might welcome the opportunity." Prudence's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's very considerate, Mr. Prescott." "May I ask why now, when I've been teaching here for 2 years?" Prescott shifted uncomfortably. "Recent events have demonstrated your dedication, despite challenging circumstances. The position offers significantly higher compensation and proper facilities." Wyatt watched the exchange silently, recognizing Prescott's offer for what it was, an elegant solution to remove Prudence from Silver Creek while appearing generous. The influential rancher clearly shared the concerns of many about her progressive educational ideas. "It's certainly worth consideration," Prudence replied diplomatically. "When would they need my decision?" "Within the week," Prescott said, looking pleased. "The autumn term begins next month." After Prescott and his companions departed, Prudence turned to Wyatt with troubled eyes. "It's a genuine opportunity," she said quietly. "The academy would have resources I could only dream of here." "But," Wyatt prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but it feels like abandonment," she admitted. "Of my students, of the plans for adult education, of everything I've fought for here." They walked slowly toward her cabin, discussing the unexpected offer. Though Wyatt kept his counsel, inwardly he recognized the crossroads they both faced: Prudence with her teaching opportunity, himself with the bounty that could finance a new beginning. That evening, a celebration was held at the Silver Dollar Saloon in honor of Riley's capture and the town's recovery from the robbery. Wyatt attended reluctantly, still sore from his injuries, but understanding the importance of such rituals in frontier communities. Prudence arrived later, causing the usual momentary hush before conversation resumed. She made her way to Wyatt's table, acknowledging greetings from townspeople who previously would have ignored her. "Quite a different reception," she observed as she sat beside him. "Amazing how capturing outlaws changes perspectives," he replied dryly. "And surviving fires, apparently," she added. "Mrs. Collins actually invited me to her sewing circle today." Their quiet conversation was interrupted when Frank Whitaker, considerably intoxicated, approached their table. "Well, if it ain't the schoolmarm and the bounty hunter," he slurred. "Cozier than 2 peas in a pod." "Evening, Frank," Wyatt said evenly. "Perhaps you should head home." Frank ignored the suggestion. "Heard you got offered a fancy teaching job in Denver, Miss Prudence. Suppose you'll be abandoning Silver Creek like your pa did." Several nearby conversations stopped as people turned to listen. Prudence straightened in her chair. "My plans are my own concern, Mr. Whitaker." "Sure they are," Frank continued belligerently. "Just like your pa's plans were his own concern when he stole our money." Wyatt began to stand, but Prudence placed a restraining hand on his arm. "I am not my father, Mr. Whitaker," she said firmly, "as I've demonstrated every day for 2 years. "A Kendrick's a Kendrick," Frank insisted, loud enough for the entire saloon to hear. "Just waiting for the right moment to show your true colors. And you," he turned to Wyatt, defending her like some lovesick fool, "she's not worth your name, Nolan. Everyone knows it." The saloon fell silent as Wyatt slowly rose to his full height, his voice deadly quiet. "I've told you before about speaking to the lady with respect, Frank." "Or what?" Frank challenged. "You'll shoot me like one of your bounties." "No," Wyatt replied calmly. "I'll simply point out that a man who judges others solely by their family name lacks the intelligence I'd expect from even the most basic education, precisely the kind Miss Kendrick offers to anyone willing to learn." Snickers rippled through the crowd as Frank's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. "Big words from a man who kills for money." "I enforce the law," Wyatt corrected, "and I recognize value where others see only prejudice." He looked directly at Frank. "She's not worth my name. You're wrong. She's worth my life, and that's better." A murmur spread through the saloon at this declaration. Prudence's eyes widened as she looked up at Wyatt, whose expression remained steady despite the admission that had surprised even himself with its truth. Frank sputtered, seeking a retort, but Sheriff Thomas intervened. "That's enough, Frank. Go sleep it off." As Whitaker was led away by friends, Thomas nodded respectfully to Wyatt and Prudence before returning to his own table. In the awkward silence that followed, Prudence stood. "I should go," she said quietly. "It's getting late." "I'll walk you home," Wyatt offered, feeling suddenly exposed after his public declaration. They left the saloon together, walking through the quiet streets in silence until they were well away from town. Finally, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Prudence stopped. "Did you mean what you said back there?" she asked directly. Wyatt considered his answer carefully. "I've spent years tracking men across the frontier, Miss Kendrick. I've seen the worst of humanity and occasionally glimpses of the best. In all that time, I've learned to value honesty above all else." He met her gaze steadily. "Yes, I meant it." "You barely know me," she protested softly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you stayed when running would have been easier. I know you teach children who need you, regardless of how their parents treat you. I know you believe education can transform lives." He stepped closer. "I know that meeting you has made me question the path I've chosen." Prudence's expression softened. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That perhaps there are better ways to create justice than hunting bounties," he said. "That perhaps Silver Creek needs more than a temporary hero passing through." "Are you suggesting you might stay?" she asked, hope evident in her voice. "I'm suggesting I might have reason to," Wyatt answered. If certain other people were planning to remain as well, understanding dawned in her eyes. "I'm declining Prescott's offer," she revealed. "My place is here, finishing what I started." "A stubborn decision," Wyatt observed with a slight smile. "One I find I admire greatly." Later, standing at her cabin door, Wyatt took Prudence's hand in his. "I need to take Riley to Denver," he said. "It's my responsibility to see it through, but when I return—" "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. "When I return, I'd like to court you properly, Miss Kendrick." "If you're amenable." Her smile illuminated her face more beautifully than the lantern light. "I believe I would be quite amenable to that arrangement, Mr. Nolan." The journey to Denver with Riley and his captured gang took nearly 2 weeks. During that time, Wyatt reflected deeply on his conversation with Prudence and the possibilities that awaited in Silver Creek. The substantial reward for Riley's capture represented freedom, enough money to settle somewhere permanently, perhaps even start a business. Upon his return to Silver Creek, Wyatt found the town transformed. Construction on the schoolhouse was proceeding rapidly, and Prudence had successfully established temporary classes in the church while initiating evening sessions for adults 3 nights weekly. Most surprising was the change in public attitude. While some resistance remained, many townspeople now acknowledged her contributions with growing respect. True to his word, Wyatt began courting Prudence properly. They attended church together on Sundays, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and spent evenings on her porch discussing books and dreams for the future. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened into something neither had experienced before, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect and growing affection. When the new schoolhouse was finally completed in November, the town held a celebration that drew people from miles around. Prudence stood proudly at the entrance, welcoming each visitor personally. Watching her, Wyatt felt certainty settle in his heart about the decision he'd been contemplating. That evening, after the festivities concluded, they walked along the creek where golden leaves still clung to aspens despite the season's advancing chill. "I've been thinking about permanence," Wyatt said as they paused to watch the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "Have you?" Prudence asked, her hand warm in his. "Silver Creek needs a new sheriff," he continued. "Thomas is retiring come spring. He's recommended me for the position." Surprise and delight mingled in her expression. "You'd accept?" "I would," Wyatt confirmed, "if certain other considerations align favorably." "What considerations might those be?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. In answer, Wyatt reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've carried this across 3 territories, waiting for the right moment," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's." Prudence's breath caught as he knelt before her on the creek bank. "Prudence Kendrick, you've taught me that there are many ways to seek justice in this world. That sometimes the most important battles are fought not with guns but with books and determination and faith in people's capacity to grow." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Wyatt Nolan, with all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added softly, "It seems you were right that day in the saloon." "About what?" he asked, rising to pull her close. "I may not have been worth your name then," she whispered against his lips, "but I promise to make it worth sharing for all our days to come." "Our names, our lives, our purpose," he replied, "all shared from this day forward." They married on Christmas Day, 1876, in the schoolhouse Prudence had fought so hard to build. The ceremony was attended by most of Silver Creek's residents, including Frank Whitaker, who gruffly offered congratulations and an awkward apology for past behavior. Spring brought Wyatt's official appointment as sheriff of Silver Creek, a position he approached with the same integrity that had marked his ranger days, but tempered now by Prudence's influence and his own matured perspective on justice. Together, they built a life that transformed not only themselves but Silver Creek itself. The adult education program flourished under Prudence's guidance, while Wyatt established a reputation for fair enforcement of the law that attracted more settlers to the area. In 1878, Their first child was born a daughter they named Eleanor, after Wyatt's mother. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James. Their home, built on land where Prudence's small cabin once stood, became known as a place of warmth and learning, where books were as valued as practical skills. By 1885, Silver Creek had grown into a thriving community with a proper school system overseen by Prudence as superintendent. Wyatt had expanded his role beyond sheriff to town councilman, helping guide the settlement's development with an eye toward justice and opportunity for all residents. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on their porch watching their children play in the yard that sloped down to the creek. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Prudence asked, leaning against her husband's solid presence. Wyatt's arm tightened around her waist. "Not until I rode into Silver Creek and saw a schoolteacher standing her ground against men twice her size. We've come a long way from she's not worth your name," she observed with a smile. "The best journeys often start with someone being completely wrong," Wyatt replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I've never made a better investment than risking my life for yours." As the mountain sunset painted the sky in colors no artist could capture, they stood together, the bounty hunter who had found true justice, and the schoolteacher who had taught an entire town the value of second chances. Their shared life had become testimony to the power of standing firm for what's right, even when standing alone. And in Silver Creek, the story of how Wyatt Nolan had declared a disgraced banker's daughter worth his life became the stuff of local legend, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are those we're willing to risk everything to protect.